Ravanamangalam Shrimadatam Bhuvindarnantiye Burida Janaha. Om peace, peace, peace. The nectar of your words, the praise of poet seers, elixir to parched souls, delight to listening ears, cleanser of all sins is great and glorious. They who spread it far and wide on earth are most generous. Om peace, peace, peace. Good evening, friends. We are continuing with our study of the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, and we are beginning a new chapter. We are on chapter 7. And the title of this chapter is The Master and Vijay Goswami. For those of you who are following with the book, we are on page 163. So it's Thursday, December 14th, 1882. It was afternoon. Sri Ramakrishna was sitting on his bed after a short noonday rest. Vijay, Balaram, M, and a few other devotees were sitting on the floor with their faces toward the Master. They could see the sacred river Ganges through the door. Since it was winter, all were wrapped up in warm clothes. Vijay had been suffering from colic and had brought some medicine with him. Vijay was a paid preacher in the Sadharan Brahmo Samaj, but there were many things about which he could not agree with. They could not agree with the Samaj authorities. He came from a very noble family of Bengal, noted for its piety and other spiritual qualities. Advaita Goswami, one of his remote ancestors, had been an intimate companion of Sri Chaitanya. Thus, the blood of a great lover of God flowed in Vijay's veins. As an adherent of the Brahmo Samaj, Vijay no doubt meditated on the formless Brahman, but his innate love of God, inherited through his distinguished ancestors, had merely been waiting for the proper time to manifest itself in all its sweetness. Thus, Vijay was irresistibly attracted by the God-intoxicated state of Sri Ramakrishna, and often sought his company. He would listen to the Master's words with great respect, and they would dance together in an ecstasy of divine love. Later on in Vijay's life, he separated completely from the Brahmo Samaj to form basically his own Brahmo Samaj. But because of his devotion to Sri Ramakrishna, he actually realized God and was considered actually a renowned saint at that time. So, as we continue, it was a weekday. Generally, devotees came to the Master in large numbers on Sundays. Hence, those who wanted to have intimate talks with him visited him only on weekdays. A boy named Vishnu, living in Aryadaha, had recently committed suicide by cutting his throat with a razor, and the talk turned to him. So we have M, Balaram, Vijay, and obviously this news has spread out throughout many of the people associated with Sri Ramakrishna, the Brahmo Samaj, and they came to Sri Ramakrishna to find some get some consolation, and also some understanding of how this could happen. Why would a young boy commit suicide? So the master says, I felt very badly when I heard of the boy's passing away. He was a pupil in a school, and he used to come here. He would often say to me that he couldn't enjoy worldly life. He had lived with some relatives in the western provinces, and at that time used to meditate in solitude in the meadows, hills, and forests. He told me he had visions of many divine forms. Perhaps this was his last birth. He must have finished most of his duties in his previous birth. The little that had been left undone was perhaps finished in this one. Now, Swami Ramakrishna rarely gave his opinion about reincarnation, whether it was legitimate, whether reincarnation actually, if there was any such thing as reincarnation. So he always, he would either say, well, I've heard something like that, or he would say, the scriptures speak about reincarnation. But he would never say adamantly that, no, there is something called reincarnation. But yet he's talking about that here, in this case, but using the word perhaps. Perhaps this was his last life. Perhaps he had finished his duties. So perhaps, using that word again, he's trying to tell us that there's something like reincarnation, but perhaps not quite the way we are interpreting or understanding reincarnation. But then he would say, but then he follows up with that and says, one must admit the existence of tendencies inherited from previous births. Now this boy, he was devoted to Swami Ramakrishna, and Swami Ramakrishna noticed many virtues in him. And that's what impressed him about this boy. So now the question is, this was a young boy. He could not have acquired all these good tendencies in his short lifetime. He must have inherited these tendencies in a previous life. That's the only way that you could explain why a boy so devoted like this would have such devotion to God. And he will explain further later on as we read what his thoughts are on that. But meanwhile, he starts to give he tells a story of how this might be possible. He says, there is a story about a man who practiced the Shava sadhana. The Shava sadhana is a tantric form of worship where one actually sits on a corpse, and that corpse is his seat for meditation. And so this man, it's about a man who practiced this discipline. He worshipped the Divine Mother in a deep forest. First, he saw many terrible visions, and finally, a tiger attacked and killed him. Another man, happening to pass and seeing the approach of the tiger, had climbed a tree. Afterwards, he got down and found all the arrangements for worship at hand. He performed some purifying ceremonies and seated himself on the corpse. No sooner had he done a little japa than the Divine Mother appeared before him and said, "My child, I am very much pleased with you. Accept a boon from me." He bowed low to the lotus feet of the goddess and said, "May I ask you one question, Mother? I am speechless with amazement at your action. The other man worked so hard to get the ingredients for your worship and tried to propitiate you for such a long time, but you didn't condescend to show him to show him your favor. And I, who don't know anything of worship, who have done nothing, who have neither devotion nor knowledge nor love, and who haven't practiced any austerities, am receiving so much of your grace. The Divine Mother said with a laugh, "My child, you don't remember your previous births. For many births you tried to propitiate me through austerities. As a result of those austerities, all these things have come to hand, and you have been blessed with my vision. Now ask me your boon." Well, the idea here is that we are born along with the tendencies from our previous lives. So a devotee, and M often disguised himself when he's the one speaking as a devotee in the gospel. So he says, "I am frightened to hear of the suicide." And the master replies, "Suicide is a heinous sin, undoubtedly. A man who kills himself must return again and again to this world and suffer its agony." Well, before I continue, I think we should probably examine this statement as it would be understood in Hinduism. Because the scriptures say things like the fruits of action are never destroyed and will either have to be experienced in this life or in the next life. So Sri Krishna has reassured Arjuna that any spiritual progress you make in this life, you will continue in the next life from where you left off. And also that no effort goes wasted. So perhaps you have made some effort, but you have not reached the goal before dying, but you will reap the results of your actions based on the efforts you have made and whatever wrong things you have done. So your next life will be a combination of the results from your good and your bad actions. So in either case, whether we have reached the goal and realized God before we have died, or we have still some ways to go, all those tendencies, inherited tendencies, move along with the body, but they move along in the subtle body. And if we have made many mistakes also, those will follow along with us. Now, some are born with the love of God, like this young boy, Vishnu, and others appear to be prodigies, so they seem to have inherited some tendencies that allow them to process, to do something, do a particular task very well. Just as a lover of God, his task as his love of God is so defined and so well done that he experiences God. Or you are born with worldly ambitions and aspirations, and along with that a combination of good and bad tendencies, and those inherited tendencies will also follow you into your next life. So even the tendencies we have today, we have to understand that those are inherited tendencies from either good, bad actions that we have performed in this life, or if they cannot really be explained, then perhaps we have inherited those tendencies from a previous life. And consequently, we either enjoy or suffer according to the results of those actions that we have performed. So, as I mentioned, just though the body dies, its accumulated tendencies move along with the subtle body. But just as one fires an arrow from a bow or shoots a bullet from a gun, that thought has to hit a target. Even if we have died, the energy that has been put into that thought has to reach a target. If that target is of a worldly nature, then we are born in a place or an environment where that target is available or where those tendencies can be exercised. And we then will be affected by the results of that object or that thought hitting a target, whether it be a worldly ambition, whether it be realizing God, or whether it be attaining something of this world that cannot be experienced in a world of more subtle world. So then, when does a person commit suicide? Well, at that point, they can't endure the intensity of physical or mental suffering, and they think that their body is the cause of their suffering, and they feel that by getting rid of the body, they will be free from all suffering. But Hinduism says that, and Sri Ramakrishna reaffirms, he says, a man who kills himself must return again and again to this world and suffer its agony. So the suffering will continue. That was a very dominant thought at the time the person is committing suicide. So the only choice is that they will be reborn to continue from where they left off. And so if you can understand that the suffering will continue, then you can't really justify destroying the body. And Sri Ramakrishna has often said that the purpose of life is to realize God while living. Well, living is only possible if you keep the body intact. And so he says it's better to endure the torments and suffer bravely. By going through that, one develops the willpower, one develops all the character one needs to overcome suffering. And so when he says the purpose of life is to realize God while living, then how can we, if we are of clear thinking, but often a person with suicidal thoughts is not capable of clear thinking, so then perhaps they need to be able to talk it out or to understand that perhaps they're suffering, they need to go through it one way or the other. But what about when you start reading the side effects on some medicine bottles? It says suicidal tendency to suicidal thoughts. And what if one acts on that? Are they responsible then? Well, then I would say that one is not making a conscious decision to commit suicide if drug interactions are at play. So, but what about mental illness and all those things? Well, at that point, that is when one needs the intervention of the medical community and spiritual guidance or whatever is needed at that point. But if you understand that that ending one's life will not cease one's suffering, then one must make effort and find a way to relieve that suffering by resolving their own understanding of what the purpose of life is. But also another point of it is that If one commits suicide before attaining God, one has also destroyed the opportunity to realize God. So, and by eliminating that opportunity, you have basically taken away, that is when you have committed a sin, in that sense. In fact, taking away the opportunity of any human being to realize God is considered a sin, whether it's your own life or any other life. So one should make every effort to endure what they can. But then the Master says, now in relation to Vishnu earlier, he says, but I don't call it suicide if a person leaves this body after having the vision of God. There is no harm in giving up one's body that way. After attaining knowledge, some people give up their bodies. After the gold image has been cast in the clay mold, you may either preserve the mold or break it. So here, now Swami Nikhilananda had the ability to be able to see into the nature of people. So he understood that the act that Vishnu, the young boy, performed was not as a result of mental and physical suffering. He had experienced God and felt that the body was no longer of any use to him. He did not need the body any longer to try to realize God. And sometimes God, if one has realized God, God retains a sense of ego in that person, which enables that person to then teach others, as in the case of Swami Nikhilananda or other saints. But in the case of this boy, he left no sense of ego. And so the boy felt, well, there's no need to retain this body any further. Now, I can imagine that there are some people that have, with mental illness, that might say, they can justify this, following exactly the same thought pattern, and say, no, I experience God, I see God everywhere. Whether that's hallucination or what it is, I'm no judge to say. But only God can answer that question. There is no way to prove one way or the other. All we can say is, what is the state of mind of the person at that time? So that's why Swami Nikhilananda has mentioned that when you have cast gold into a clay mold, you no longer need the mold, because you have to break it apart to get the gold out of it. If you watch how they make gold statues and so forth, the clay is actually a ball with the shape of the image inside, made out of wax that has all been melted out of it, with a hole at the top where you pour in the molten gold. That takes the shape of the statue. The only way to get that statue out, the only way to realize God, is you have to crack the clay. And then you get the statue. So the clay mold is no longer needed. The boy's body was no longer needed to realize God. So, and even in Sri Ramakrishna's case, he retained that sense of ego that made him retain the body so that he could teach. But at the point where he felt the body was no longer required, it had absorbed all the illnesses, the cancer and so forth. But many people that experience intense pain when they are suffering from all kinds of when their life is terminal, will consider suicide, whether they should give up the body. In Washington State, they have death with dignity, where one could medically commit suicide. They don't call it that, but that's essentially what it is. But Sri Ramakrishna once asked the disciples whether should I drop the body now? And the disciples were kind of shocked to hear that. Because Sri Ramakrishna, although he was going through a lot of suffering, could have dropped his body at any time. But seeing that it would cause his devotees pain and suffering, because they'd all come to love him and serve him, he decided to go through that torment and that suffering until the body died on its own. So we need to live bravely and go through whatever suffering we have to. Sri Ramakrishna is now telling the story of another person who did a similar thing. He says, many years ago, a young man of about 20 used to come to the temple garden from Baranagar. His name was Gopal Sen. In my presence, he used to experience such intense ecstasy that Hridoy had to support him for fear he might fall to the ground and break his limbs. That young man touched my feet one day and said, "Sir, I shall not be able to see you anymore. Let me bid you goodbye." A few days later, I learned he had given up his body. So again, God, for whatever reason, felt that in this person also to leave no sense of ego. He has realized the goal of life, and that is essentially also our goal. Now, it may also sound frightening that, well, is spiritual practice and all that we're going through slow death? Because so far it seems that, well, if we experience God in this life, it means sure death, unless God retains some sense of ego in us. And for some people, that is a frightening thought, and they give up their spiritual practices once they understand that that is. But the thing is that spiritual practice is all about developing fearlessness and character. You can bear all the suffering to the point where it's not suffering. You're doing it as service to God. You might be experiencing pain and all that kind of thing, but one cannot experience the highest without giving up everything. We only feel, oh, that's a bad thing because we are connected to this world. But when we realize that God is in everything within us and within everything in the world, that it can't be separated from anything, then we don't have that sense of separation anymore. And without that, and when we don't have that sense of separation, we also don't have the fear of losing anything. So even when the body is given up, there's no fear in that. How much fear will the person who's trying to commit suicide have? How much have they deliberated when they will do it, how they will do it, imagining what they will suffer and all that? There's complete fear there, as opposed to one who has realized God. So I will actually stop on that note for people to think about. And since death is inevitable, the better we can develop our minds before we die, the stronger we die, basically, the stronger our character when we die. So I wish you all good luck. So if there are no questions, I will conclude with a chant and give some announcements. Niranjanam nityam anantarupam bhaktanukampa dritavigraham vai Ishavataram paramesamityam tvam Ramakrishnam shirasa namamaha. We salute that Ramakrishna who is without blemish, eternal and infinite in forms, who has assumed human form out of compassion for the devotees, who is God incarnate, the Supreme Lord, and who is most worshipful. Om, peace, peace, peace. Oh, I probably should have done the announcements first, but anyway. Just to remind you that tomorrow evening, Swami Brahmatmananda via Google Meet will be conducting a class on the book Towards the Goal Supreme. That's at 7 p.m. tomorrow evening. And this Friday, Swami Satyamananda will be given a class on Ramakrishna's miracle, Gaurima. She was the first monastic disciple initiated into monasticism by Sri Ramakrishna. And she was a nun, and she started her own organization a few years later. On Saturday here in Seattle, we will have a Karma Yoga Day that will begin at 10 o'clock. Swami Satyamananda will give a brief talk about Karma Yoga, and will continue till about 1 p.m. And on Sunday, we have the children's program at Mother's Children during the lecture, which Swami Satyamananda will be giving, the title of which is The Mighty Confluence. So you're all invited to attend that, both online and in person. Thank you.